Hey, Christina here. Welcome to my crystal art series. I'll be taking you through the design process behind Veins of Flowing Courage. Let's go. So here is my mood board behind this piece. I was really inspired by the stars and its texture effect in the sky, as well as rivers and their flow through the earth, and how it shapes itself within the earth. So obviously it's not a smooth pathway. There's winds and curves and all these interesting shapes. And then there's rocks in between and little islands. So I thought that is really cool, and it has a very interesting look to it. And that was kind of my inspiration from that. As well as the Milky Way, it has the similar type of effect to the river, where it has an interesting contour shape, and I wanted to really play on that for this piece. I was also looking at shale rock texture, that really thin layer. It's super flaky, but it's super smooth, and I thought it would be really cool to have this type of effect within the piece somehow. I was also looking at paint spills and how that type of effect could be brought into this piece as well, because it can play a great role in creating some sort of a river pathway. Also, creating the little islands in the middle, because that's what it looks like when you spill paint. When you spill the paint, it has a little bit of bubbles and little islands of different colors, and it creates interesting shapes. So I thought the paint spill was a really neat idea to kind of incorporate into this. And colors, I was really trying to focus on complementary colors for this piece. So I was looking at greens and reds and what types of greens to use, as well as what types of reds I should use, because I don't want them to be too clashy, but I also want to bring in some interest and energy. And then the last piece of information that I was really looking at was the Bloodstone. So looking at its characteristics, I saw that it has a speckle-like texture within the rock, as well as it looks like veins flowing around the stone that are in red. So I really wanted to bring out that characteristic within that stone, because it really influenced how I was taking this project on. So now what I'm going to do is take it into Procreate. Now we're in Procreate, and I started to plan the layout out, exploring options on how I was going to bring flow to this piece. I really was drawn to the paint spill, the river, and the Milky Way for these ideas. And I started in with the line work using the monoline brush tool. And then next I added in the base colors, which was red and green. But I wanted the green to have a bit more of a blue tone to it, so that the colors were not clashing together. I wanted it to have a little bit of a soft effect, nothing too uncomfortable. So moving on to focusing on the complementary colors, that's why I didn't want to go too far into bringing in other colors. The focus here was really on those complementary colors, but really bringing out the characteristics of what Bloodstone has, which is colors of red and green. There is actually some mint in there, so that was something I wanted to really bring out. I started also bringing in texture, and I started with the middle section because that was going to be the focal point. And I wanted to bring in that shale inspiration, trying to find a texture brush that's very close to that. And I used the fresco brush from Procreate. I thought it really brought in some characteristics of shale. Next I moved into the bottom section, and I played around with a lighter tint of green to more of a mint green, and used the driven snow brush because it was really bringing in that inspiration that I had for stars, but also tying it back to the Bloodstone and its characteristics, which it has speckles within the stone. So I thought that was very neat, and I kept to it. But the piece was looking still a little flat, especially in that section. So I brought in another texture brush called Hearts brush, and it has a little bit of a grunge to it, and that was something that it needed. It needed some depth. So I brought that in, and I explored the type of shade of green I wanted to use to bring that depth in. And the Bloodstone itself also has this type of effect on the stone and has mixtures of different shades of green within it. So bringing in that texture and characteristic from the stone really connects it well to what I was going for. Now, I also did the same treatment to the top because I wanted to balance out the piece. But what I did was I played with a little bit of saturation so that the bottom was a bit more darker than the top, because I wanted to ground the piece more. I didn't want it to feel, heavy at the top or lighter at the bottom. I wanted to make sure there was an even balance to the piece. And lastly, to define the shapes and its interesting contours, I emphasize that by bringing in a line work type of effect, and I used the studio brush tool to play around with thick and thin lines to really define those shapes. So once we were all done in Procreate, I brought my piece into Illustrator, where I started to make an artboard of 8.5 by 11, and I made 2 rectangular boxes measured by 4 by 6 inches, and I merged these two together. But before I did that, I found its center point within the middle, and I drew a line down the middle to really showcase where the center is, and I created crop marks around the rectangle box by creating little lines at each of the corners of the rectangle. And this was going to show me where I would be cutting when this is going to be printed on cardstock. So once that was all set up, I placed my picture on the right side of my card because that was going to be the front of the card. And then I put all my details on the back of the card, which is the left side of the card. So once that was all done, I saved it as a PDF and I printed it out on cardstock paper. I brought it to my drafting table and I was ready for scoring. So scoring is basically just indenting your page all the way down with a small little crease. And this crease helps to fold your card in a clean manner. So I use a scoring tool, which is my blue little tool that you're seeing there, and I just lightly go down the page and it creates a little crease for me. Once I did that, I took it to my cutting board and I cut down my card to size using my X-Acto knife and ruler, lined it up with my crop marks, and got that all prepared and ready to be painted on. Lastly, I wanted to spice it up a little bit, so I had some red glitter paint, and what I wanted to do was draw some more emphasis to the middle section of this piece. And what I thought was interesting about this type of finish that I did was the piece had a little bit of a shine to it after I applied the paint. So the paint didn't have too much glitter, but the actual effect that it left on my piece was kind of like a bubbly effect, and it had an interesting texture to it when you were touching it. It's hard to see in this piece, or in the video, but in live it looks really interesting. It has really cool water-like effect, and I thought that was cool. So that was kind of the interesting point that I wanted to bring to this piece. And I want to say thank you guys for tuning in, and I hope that you stick around for more of my videos. Have a good day, everybody. Keep smiling. Bye.